You're at a restaurant and the bill comes. Now what? Do you tip 15%, 20%, more, less? What about barbers, hotel staff, and valet? When it comes to tipping, a gentleman knows when to be generous and when to be measured. What is considered good tipping etiquette varies by the culture, the scenario, and also the level of service received. But after watching this video, you need never second guess how much to tip again. Hello, my name is James, and I'm on a mission to create a generation of gentlemen. This video will mostly be relevant to American culture, but I will address culture in Europe, the UK, and the rest of the world later on in the video, so stick around for that. But first, let's talk about the US. America is a tipping culture, and service workers rely on tips as a core part of their income. We'll get into how much to tip in many different situations in just a second, but here are some baseline expectations for tipping. 15% is the bare minimum, 20% is standard for good service, and 25% is for exceptional service. But remember, just because a gentleman is generous doesn't mean he gets taken advantage of. There's no need to tip 15% if the service is downright disrespectful. So let's start by talking about restaurants and cafes. For a sit-down restaurant, 18 to 20% of the total bill pre-tax is standard, but feel free to tip 25% or even more if the service was excellent. If you're at a fast, casual restaurant with counter service or a coffee shop, tipping is optional, but somewhere between 10 and 15% is appreciated. And if you're at a buffet restaurant, at least 10% is fair, because the staff, although they don't have to bring you your food and take your order, they still have to clear your table. When you're at a bar, if you're drinking beers, $1 or $2 per drink is acceptable. If you're at a place that's more upmarket or you're having a cocktail, then 20% of the total bill, or around 20% of each drink, is a fair amount because cocktails take much more work to create than simply opening a can of beer. And if you ever go to a nightclub and order bottle service, you want to tip between $50 and $100, depending on the level of service you've received and the type of nightclub. Now let's move on to grooming and personal care situations. For your barber, 20% is fair for a good cut, but I would go up to 25% if they did an exceptional job. Personally, I tip my barber 25% because the haircut is $40, and it makes more sense to give him $10 than $8. If you're going somewhere more high-end, like a salon with a hairstylist, at least 20% or more would be expected. If you ever go for a massage or to a spa, then 15 to 20% is fair. And for any of you tattooed gentlemen, it's nice to tip your artist between 20 and 25% if they've done a good job. When you are traveling, there are many different tipping situations you should know about. First, let's talk about the bellhop. For the bellhop, tip them between $2 and $5 per bag, depending on how awkward and how heavy they were to carry. For your housekeeper, between $3 to $5 per night is fair, obviously a little more for extended stays when they are taking care of your place for a longer period of time. And you don't have to tip them every day, you can simply leave this money at the end of your stay. It's not necessary to tip the concierge for providing basic help and information, but if they really go above and beyond to help you, then you could leave a tip of between $10 and $50 depending on the task. And if you use a valet, between $3 and $7 each time you get your car back is fair. If somebody else is driving you, then between 15 and 20% of the total fare is a good amount for an Uber driver or taxi driver. But if you have a luxury chauffeur, at least 20% is minimum. And if you have hired a private driver for a long distance journey, $50, $100, or even more is fair. It all depends on the service level and how far they have driven. If you are getting takeout delivered, 15 to 20% is a good amount. For grocery deliveries, 10 to 15%. Unfortunately, with these services, you have to tip before you have received the service, but you could also leave a fairly low tip before you receive the service and then tip them with cash on delivery. And if you have somebody coming over to put your furniture together or install an appliance, between $10 to $20 per person is fair, depending on the job they did. What about if you're on vacation and you decide to take a guided tour of the city? In that case, between $10 and $20 for the tour guide is fair. If you're at the casino, tip your dealer between $5 and $10 per session, but of course more if you win big. And I forgot to mention the coat check, which of course happens at restaurants, casinos, many different venues. There, between $1 and $3 per item is fair. Now, if you are hosting an event and you are hiring bartenders, waitstaff, musicians, how much do you tip them? These hired guns will normally expect between $50 and $100, depending on the length of the service they provided. If you're hiring a mover, somewhere between $20 and $50 is fair for good service. And if you take your car to a mechanic, a tip is not expected, but a small cash tip or a gift card will be very much appreciated. Now, it's very important that we also talk about when not to tip. Sometimes tipping can be unethical, possibly even illegal. When you see your doctor, or when you hire a lawyer, or anytime you're working with any kind of government official, receiving tips goes against their professional code of ethics. It's also really not necessary to tip a retail worker unless they provide an exceptional service. It's forbidden by most airlines for their flight attendants to receive tips, and when making corporate business transactions, tipping can be seen as inappropriate or even a form of bribery. And finally, let's talk about tipping around the world. In Europe, many countries, including Spain, France, and Germany, now include a service charge on the bill, particularly at more upmarket restaurants. Extra tipping is appreciated, but it's not expected like it is in the US. You can simply round up the amount or leave 5%, 10%. It's very much the same in the UK. Service charge is often included, and an extra tip is not expected. But if you do want to go the extra mile, or if the service charge was not included, around 10% is a good amount. Now, if you ever go to Japan, do not tip. It is seen as rude there because service is simply part of their culture. Instead, show your gratitude with your words and a bow. Likewise, in China, tipping is not expected. Sometimes it's refused. However, upscale Western restaurants and hotels may sometimes accept a small tip. If you're ever in Australia or New Zealand, tipping is not expected, but a 10% tip will be appreciated. And in Mexico, tipping is expected, around 10 to 15% in restaurants. And small tips in taxis, hotels, or on tours are definitely appreciated. So how do you tip like a gentleman? Always carry cash. Cash is king when it comes to tipping. Always carry small bills for tipping. But be discreet. Flashing cash when tipping feels rather transactional and showy. Now, a gentleman knows when to be generous. Exceptional service deserves recognition. And especially if you become a regular at a place, it's more than okay to exceed the regular tipping guidelines. But never feel pressured to tip. Tipping should be respectful, not forced. In conclusion, a gentleman is generous, yet never reckless. And I hope that knowing the right amount to tip in every situation will give you the confidence you need. If I missed any tipping situations, let me know down in the comments and I can provide my advice there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.